In a grand kingdom where golden towers touched the sky and the streets shimmered with sunlight, there lived an emperor who loved only one thing more than his crown, his clothes. Every morning, he stood before his tall mirror, trying on coats, capes, and robes stitched with jewels. He had outfits for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Even when his people came to him with problems, he only cared about one question: how do I look today? The townspeople often whispered behind his back. Our emperor loves his closet more than his country, said one. He doesn't care if we are hungry, said another, as long as he shines like a star. But no one dared to say these words aloud, for the emperor's pride was as sharp as his crown. One bright morning, when the sky was clear and the palace bells rang softly, two strangers arrived at the city gates. They wore colorful coats, strange hats, and smiles that seemed too wide to be real. They carried with them a large shining trunk and spoke in smooth, clever voices. Good people, one of them said, we are master tailors from a faraway land. We make the finest clothes in all the world. Not just fine, added the other, but magical. Clothes so special that only the wise and worthy can see them. Fools and those unfit for their jobs will see nothing at all. The crowd gasped. Invisible clothes, they whispered. That sounds impossible. But still, their eyes filled with wonder. If these tailors spoke the truth, such magic could change the kingdom forever. Soon, word of the strange visitors spread through the city like wildfire. It reached the grand golden palace before noon. When the emperor heard it, he stopped brushing his silk sleeve and looked up at his servant. Invisible clothes, he repeated slowly. His eyes gleamed with excitement. Only the wise can see them? The servant bowed. Yes, your majesty. The whole city is talking about it. The emperor leaned back on his velvet throne and smiled. How clever. If I wore such clothes, I could find out who among my people are fools. No one would dare lie to me again. His laughter echoed through the marble halls. Bring those tailors to me at once. Later that day, the two travelers were led into the royal court. They bowed deeply, their eyes flickering with mischief. The emperor's hall glittered with gold, but the tailors seemed unbothered. They looked straight at the emperor and said, Your Majesty, we can make you the finest suit ever worn by man, light as air, bright as truth, and invisible to those who are unworthy of your greatness. The emperor's heart beat faster. And you can make it for me? Of course, said one tailor, bowing again. We only need the purest silk, the finest gold thread, and a quiet room to work. No one must disturb us. The emperor waved his jeweled hand. You shall have all that you ask for. I want this magical suit ready before the royal parade next week. The whole kingdom will see my greatness. The tailors smiled and bowed again. As you wish, your majesty. That evening, the palace buzzed with excitement. The servants whispered about the invisible fabric, and the ministers nodded proudly as if they already believed in it. Only a few dared to wonder if the tailors were telling the truth, but they quickly silenced themselves. Who would question the emperor's wishes? In a small corner of the city, an old woman chuckled to her grandson. Magic clothes, eh? I've lived a long time and never seen such nonsense. But even she could not help wondering what might happen next. Meanwhile, in the high tower of the palace, the two tailors opened their shiny trunk. Inside, there was nothing, no silk, no thread, no cloth. Yet they smiled at each other as they pretended to plan their invisible masterpiece. Far below, the emperor looked out of his balcony window. The city lights twinkled like stars, and his mind danced with dreams of his new robe, one that would prove he was not just rich, but wise. He did not know that his greatest lesson was about to begin, one that no silk or gold could ever teach. The two strange tailors were given a bright, wide room inside the palace, a chamber with tall windows, golden curtains, and soft carpets underfoot. The emperor himself ordered that no one should disturb them while they worked. Servants carried in baskets of silk, spools of gold thread, and chests of silver coins for their payment. The tailors bowed deeply and thanked the emperor with honeyed words, but as soon as the door closed, they burst into quiet laughter. There was not a single real thread in the room. They had no cloth, no needles, no scissors, only their clever lies and quick hands. "Let us begin," said one, pretending to stretch fabric across the loom. "Yes," said the other, moving his hands in the air. "We must make it perfect for the emperor." Day after day, they sat at the empty looms, pretending to weave. Whenever someone peeked inside, they moved their hands quickly, humming softly as if deep in their work. From a distance, it looked like magic. From up close, it was only air. The emperor grew impatient and sent his most trusted minister to check on their progress. The old man was wise and loyal, but also proud. When he entered the room, his eyes went wide. There was nothing on the looms, not a single thread. He blinked again and rubbed his eyes. Still nothing. The tailors looked at him and smiled kindly. "Ah, good sir," said one. "Aren't these colors beautiful? The fabric shines like moonlight, doesn't it?" The minister froze. His heart began to pound. "I see nothing," he thought, "but if I say that, they will think I am foolish, or worse, unfit for my job." "Oh yes," he said quickly, forcing a smile. very fine indeed. The colors are magnificent." The tailors nodded, pretending to hold the invisible cloth up to the light. "We knew a man as clever as you would see its beauty," one said smoothly. When the minister returned to the emperor, he bowed deeply and said, "Your Majesty, their work is marvelous. I have never seen such shining colors or light fabric. It is truly fit for a king." The emperor clapped his hands in delight. "Wonderful. Begin the celebrations early. My new clothes will be the talk of the world." Word spread through the palace. Every servant and advisor wanted to see the magical fabric that only the wise could see. One by one, they visited the room, and one by one, they saw nothing, but none dared to speak the truth. Even the young page who carried water to the tailors whispered later, "I didn't see any cloth, but maybe I'm just too simple to notice." Fear spread faster than truth. Meanwhile, the tailors grew richer every day. They asked for more gold, more silk, more silver, saying they needed it to finish their work. The emperor, desperate to own the magical clothes, gave them everything they asked for. Late at night, while the palace slept, the two men sat laughing by candlelight. "They believe every word," one said. "And soon, the emperor will believe it too." "By the end of the week," said the other, "we'll have enough gold to fill this trunk." And so the days passed. The tailors continued their act, pretending to cut air with invisible scissors, pretending to sew with invisible needles. The sound of their fake stitching filled the room like a soft hum of deceit. Outside, the people talked endlessly about the emperor's new clothes. Some claimed to have seen the fabric glow from the palace windows. Others swore it sparkled like stars. No one wanted to admit the truth, no one had seen a thing. In his chamber, the emperor stared at his reflection in the mirror, his mind full of dreams. Soon, he said to himself, "I will wear the most wonderful clothes in the world, clothes that only the wise can see." He smiled proudly, imagining how his people would cheer. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "What if it's not true? What if I see nothing?" He shook his head, dismissing the thought. The great parade was only days away, and he would soon know for sure. Little did he realize that the trick had already begun, and that the tailor's empty looms were weaving not fabric, but a web, one strong enough to trap a king's pride. The emperor could hardly wait any longer. Every day he asked, "Are my new clothes ready?" And every day the tailors smiled and bowed. "Almost, Your Majesty. The cloth is delicate. It must be handled with care." Finally, one morning, when sunlight poured through the palace windows and the city below bustled with excitement, the tailors sent word that the fabric was finished. The emperor's heart leapt. He ordered his most trusted courtiers to go and see it first. "Bring me a full report," he said. "I must know how magnificent it looks." So 3 of his finest men, the chief minister, the royal treasurer, and the head of the guard, hurried to the tailor's chamber. They were greeted with deep bows and smiles. The tailors waved their hands over the empty loom, pretending to lift a shimmering sheet of cloth. "Ah, behold," said one tailor. Do you see how it shines in the light? Magnificent, isn't it? Said the other. So light and soft that it floats like air. The three men stared at the empty loom. Their mouths went dry. They saw nothing at all, only air. But fear tightened their throats. The chief minister thought, if I admit I can't see it, they'll say I'm unfit for my position. The treasurer thought, they'll call me a fool. I'll lose the emperor's favor. The head of the guard thought, if even these wise men see it, then I must too. So each of them nodded and forced a smile.
Ah,
Yes, it's beautiful. So fine, so elegant, said the minister. The colors are brighter than the rainbow, added the treasurer. And so light, said the guard, pretending to touch the air. The tailors grinned. We are honored, gentlemen. The emperor will be the most splendid ruler in the world. When the men returned to the emperor, they bowed deeply. Your Majesty, they said, we have never seen such beauty in all our lives. The cloth is as light as mist, yet it glows like gold. You will outshine the sun itself. The emperor was delighted. His chest swelled with pride. Then tomorrow, he said, I shall go and see it with my own eyes. That night, the palace was alive with whispers. Servants passed through the halls murmuring about the magical fabric. Some said it was made of moonlight, others said it was spun from dreams. Even those who doubted it stayed quiet, afraid of being called fools. The next morning, the tailors prepared for the emperor's visit. They waved their hands dramatically, pretending to fold and arrange the invisible cloth on tables. When the emperor entered, the whole room bowed low. Your Majesty, said one tailor, we are honored to present your royal fabric. He pretended to lift a shimmering piece of nothing. See how the colors shift in the light? Exquisite, said the other. The pattern is woven with care. Look, Your Majesty, how the golden thread glows. The emperor's eyes widened. He squinted, leaned closer, but saw nothing. Not even a thread. His heart pounded. Could it be? I see nothing. Am I unworthy? Am I a fool? A cold sweat broke across his forehead. He dared not let anyone notice. Around him, his ministers and servants nodded and smiled, pretending to admire the invisible cloth. The emperor felt trapped. If everyone else saw it, how could he be the only one who didn't? He forced a smile. Yes, it's truly beautiful, he said, pretending to examine it. The texture is divine. The colors are marvelous. The tailors exchanged a quick, secret glance of triumph. Would Your Majesty like us to begin sewing your new clothes? They asked. The emperor nodded. Yes, begin at once. Spare no detail. They bowed again, pretending to cut the air with invisible scissors and stitch the empty space with invisible thread. The emperor watched, half fascinated, half terrified. For hours they worked, humming softly, stepping back to admire their fake progress. The robe will fit perfectly, said one. We'll have it ready for the royal parade in 2 days, said the other. As the emperor left, he glanced one last time at the empty loom. Perhaps the fabric is too fine for my eyes to see, he told himself. After all, I am the emperor, I must be wise enough to see it soon. But deep inside, doubt whispered again. And though the halls of the palace glittered with gold and laughter, a quiet unease began to settle, as if the walls themselves knew that something was not quite right. Outside, the city was already buzzing with excitement. The royal parade was near. The people dreamed of seeing their emperor in clothes made of magic. None of them knew that what they would see next would become the most unforgettable sight in the history of the kingdom, the day truth itself walked beside pride, and a whole nation forgot how to speak it. The morning of the royal parade dawned bright and golden. Sunlight spilled across the marble towers of the kingdom, and the air buzzed with excitement. From every street and balcony, people leaned forward eagerly, waiting to see their emperor in his new and magical clothes. Children waved ribbons, musicians tuned their instruments, and guards polished their armor until it gleamed. The whole city shimmered with celebration. Inside the palace, the emperor stood before his grand mirror once again. His chambermaids and ministers gathered around him nervously, unsure where to look. The tailors had vanished, but no one dared mention it. The emperor raised his chin high. "Bring me my new robes," he commanded. The attendants hesitated for a moment before pretending to lift the invisible garments from their stand. They bowed deeply as they mimed dressing him, one straightened an imaginary collar, another brushed invisible dust from his shoulder. "How does it look?" asked the emperor, turning in front of the mirror. "Oh, your majesty," said the chief minister, forcing a smile, "you look extraordinary. The fabric is unlike anything we've ever seen." "Yes," said another softly, "truly fit for the wisest ruler in the world." The emperor beamed, his pride swallowing the last pieces of doubt that had lingered overnight. "Then it's time," he declared. "Open the palace gates. Let the parade begin." Trumpets blared, drums thundered, and the great golden gates swung open. The emperor stepped forward, his chin lifted high, his feet bare upon the shining cobblestones. A hush fell over the crowd as he emerged, and then, slowly, the whispers began. "Where are his clothes?" someone murmured. "Can you see them?" asked another. I don't see anything," whispered a woman, her eyes wide. But no one dared say it aloud. After all, they remembered what had been told, only fools and unworthy people could not see the magical clothes. So they clapped, and they cheered, and they called out praise, each louder than the last. "Oh, how fine he looks!" shouted a man near the front. "Such beautiful colors," said a woman, her face pale. "The pattern is divine," cried another, though her hands trembled. The emperor smiled proudly and waved, his heart swelling with joy. He could see admiration shining in every face, or so he believed. He walked taller, straighter, more certain with each step, basking in the cheers that filled the air. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a small, clear voice rose above the noise. "But he's not wearing any clothes," cried a little child, laughing with innocent surprise. The crowd froze. The drums stopped. Every sound vanished into a heavy silence. Faces turned toward the emperor, eyes widening as the truth they had all feared to speak suddenly stood bare before them. The emperor's heart slammed in his chest. His face turned crimson as he looked around, at the crowd, at his ministers, at the guards, all of them staring. He wanted to shout, to order silence, but the words would not come. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. And then, someone else laughed. Then another. Soon the laughter spread through the entire square like a wave rolling through the sea. "The child is right," cried a voice. "He's wearing nothing at all," shouted another, unable to hold back laughter. The emperor's proud smile faded. His hands twitched, as if to cover himself, but he stopped. His mind spun in panic and shame. He could run back to the palace, hide, pretend, but then he saw the eyes of his people. For the first time, they weren't filled with admiration or fear. They looked real. Honest. For a moment, he stood frozen, unsure what to do. His ministers avoided his gaze, pretending to look elsewhere. His guards shifted uncomfortably. The music had long stopped. Only the laughter of the crowd filled the morning air. Finally, the emperor drew in a shaky breath. His pride, his vanity, his foolishness, all of it pressed heavy on his shoulders. He looked up at the clear blue sky and whispered to himself, "I have been a fool." But he did not turn back. Step by step, he walked forward through the laughter, through the shame, his face red but his head still high. He had been deceived, yes. But he had also deceived himself, and now, at last, he knew the truth. As the crowd's laughter slowly faded into murmurs, the emperor disappeared into the palace gates. The golden doors closed behind him with a heavy echo, and for a long time afterward, no one saw him again. What happened inside those palace walls would change the emperor and the kingdom forever. But that is another part of the tale. The day of the fitting arrived. The palace was filled with excitement and nervous whispers. Servants hurried through marble halls carrying candles, ribbons, and perfumes. The royal trumpets stood ready to play, and the grand mirror in the emperor's dressing room was polished until it gleamed like glassy water. Everyone waited for the moment when their emperor would finally wear the most magnificent clothes ever made. Inside the bright workshop, the two tailors moved about with great show and drama. They lifted their hands high, pretending to hold pieces of glowing fabric. "Your Majesty," one said with a graceful bow, "the suit is ready for fitting." The emperor entered proudly, surrounded by ministers, guards, and royal assistants. His heart beat fast, not from fear, but from a pride that burned brighter than gold. "Here, Your Majesty," said one tailor, pointing to an empty table, "is the jacket. Feel how soft it is." The emperor hesitated, then reached out, touching only air.
Ah,
"Yes," he said quickly, pretending to stroke the invisible cloth. "Very fine indeed. Remarkably light." "Now, the trousers," said the other tailor, pretending to hand him another piece. "Notice how perfectly they match the royal color of wisdom." The ministers nodded and murmured their approval. "Magnificent," said one. "Truly splendid," said another, even though their eyes saw nothing at all. The emperor, too proud to admit the truth, nodded along with them. The tailors moved about with careful gestures, pretending to wrap and adjust the invisible fabric around him. They bent down, pretending to tie invisible laces, and lifted the air as if sewing invisible seams. They complimented every imaginary detail: the cut of the jacket, the fall of the cape, the sparkle of non-existent jewels. Finally, one tailor stepped back, smiled grandly, and said, "Your Majesty, your new clothes are ready. They are lighter than a whisper, yet they will make you shine like the sun." The emperor looked at himself in the mirror. His reflection stared back, proud, tall, and utterly bare. His heart sank for a moment, but then the sound of admiration filled the room. Everyone clapped and cheered. "Oh, how beautiful," said one lady in waiting. "Your Majesty looks glorious," said another. "Such a marvelous fit," cried a courtier. The emperor's cheeks warmed. "Yes," he said, forcing a smile. "I do look splendid, don't I?" He turned left and right, pretending to admire the invisible fabric. The more people praised him, the prouder he stood. The tailors bowed low. "We suggest, Your Majesty, that you wear these fine clothes for the royal parade tomorrow," one said. "The people will be in awe," said the other. "Only the wise will see the beauty of your new robe. Those who do not, well, we shall know who the fools are." The emperor's pride swelled. "Yes," he said, "tomorrow, the whole kingdom shall see me in my finest attire. Prepare the carriages, polish the streets, and hang flowers from the gates." He rewarded the tailors with bags of gold and silver. They thanked him, bowing again and again, hiding their laughter as soon as he turned away. That night, while the palace slept, the two men packed their chest full of treasure. Before dawn broke, they slipped out through the city gates and disappeared into the misty morning, never to be seen again. Meanwhile, the emperor stood before his mirror, dreaming of the parade. "Everyone will see my greatness," he said softly. "And none will dare to doubt my wisdom." But as the moonlight fell across his room, even his reflection seemed to smirk, as if the mirror itself knew the truth. In the silence, the emperor began to feel something he had not felt in a long time, a small, quiet doubt creeping into his proud heart. Tomorrow would be the grand parade, the day the emperor would show his new clothes to the entire kingdom. And though he could not see them, he told himself again and again, they are there. They must be there. Yet somewhere deep inside, a single question whispered louder and louder. What if they aren't? That evening, the once bright palace was filled with silence. The laughter from the streets still echoed faintly beyond the golden gates, but inside the emperor's chambers, there was only the soft sound of crackling fire. The emperor sat alone, staring at his reflection, not at his clothes, but at himself. For the first time, he did not see a ruler wrapped in gold and pride. He saw a man who had been blinded by vanity and lies. His advisors crept into the room one by one, heads bowed low. None dared to speak first. The emperor raised his hand, signaling them to stand still. "You all knew," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was heavy. "You all saw nothing, yet you told me I looked magnificent." The ministers exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one old counselor stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we feared that if we spoke the truth, you would be angry. You always wish to hear only praise." The emperor sighed deeply. He knew the man spoke the truth. For years, he had surrounded himself with flattery, pushing away anyone who dared to be honest. The false tailors had fooled him easily, not because they were clever, but because he had wanted to believe their lies. He rose slowly and walked to the window. The city below was dark now, quiet after the day's commotion. "I have been foolish," he said softly. "But I cannot remain so." The next morning, when the sun returned, the people of the kingdom gathered again outside the palace. They expected anger, or punishment, or perhaps silence forever. But instead, the emperor appeared, this time wearing simple, plain robes of white linen. The crowd murmured in surprise. The emperor walked to the balcony and raised his hand for silence. "My people," he began, his voice steady, "yesterday you all saw the truth I refused to see. I let pride blind me. I let vanity guide my heart. I wanted to be admired, not loved. I wanted glory, not goodness." The people listened quietly. No one laughed now. "I have learned," he continued, "that true greatness is not in jewels or gold, but in honesty, kindness, and wisdom. From this day forward, I will rule not as a man of silk and mirrors, but as one who listens, truly listens." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, people began to cheer, softly at first, then louder, until the whole city roared with joy. The emperor smiled humbly. The shame of yesterday still burned, but it had become something new, a lesson carved deeply into his heart. Weeks passed, and the emperor kept his promise. He sold his endless wardrobes and used the gold to help the poor. He built schools, opened gardens, and invited honest counselors into his court, people who spoke truth, even when it was hard to hear. The kingdom slowly changed. Where once the people whispered behind closed doors, now they spoke freely. Where fear had ruled, laughter and trust returned. And sometimes, when the emperor walked among his people, he would see children playing in the streets and hear them giggling, "Remember the day the emperor wore nothing at all?" He would laugh with them, not out of embarrassment, but with a gentle pride in how far he had come. Because now, the emperor truly wore something finer than any robe, the wisdom of humility, and the respect of his people. And so, the kingdom thrived. Not with the shimmer of gold or the glitter of jewels, but with the bright light of honesty and the warmth of truth, gifts that could never be stolen and never fade. And that is how the emperor, who once loved clothes more than anything, learned to dress himself in the only thing that truly mattered, the courage to be real. Years passed in the great kingdom, and though the story of the invisible clothes became a favorite tale for children, it was not forgotten by the emperor himself. Every time he passed through the grand hall where the false tailors had once worked, he remembered the lesson written into that shameful day. He never ordered silks or golden robes again. Instead, he chose simple garments woven by the village women, soft, plain, and real. But the emperor's change went deeper than his wardrobe. He had once ruled from behind thick palace walls, hidden from his people, but now he walked freely through the city streets. Children ran to greet him, farmers offered him fruit from their stalls, and old women told him stories of their lives. For the first time, he truly listened. He learned that his people's joy was more beautiful than any jewel, and their laughter more valuable than any crown. Still, not everyone had changed so easily. Some nobles in his court missed the old days, the parades, the endless feasts, and the empty compliments. One evening, a wealthy duke said, "Your Majesty, the people forget who you are. A king must look grand. Why not order new royal robes to remind them of your greatness?" The emperor looked at him for a long moment and then smiled. "My greatness," he said, "is not in the thread of my coat, but in the hearts of my people. If they love me, they will remember me. If they do not, no gold will make me worthy of their respect." The court fell silent. The nobles bowed their heads, ashamed. That night, the emperor walked alone in the palace garden. The moonlight shimmered over the ponds, and the air was filled with the gentle hum of crickets. He remembered the laughter of the crowd that day, the shock, the whispers, the child's innocent voice that had shattered his pride. He's not wearing anything, the boy had said, and the words still echoed in his memory, not as an insult, but as truth. He often wondered about that boy, who he was, and where he might be now. One day, the emperor ordered his guards to find him, not to punish, but to thank him. After many days, they returned with a humble family from a small village. The boy was older now, but his curious eyes still sparkled with honesty. When they stood before the emperor, he knelt down and smiled. "You spoke the truth when all others were silent," he said gently. "You showed me what courage truly means." The boy blushed and said softly, "I was just telling what I saw." The emperor nodded. "And that is what makes a wise man, one who dares to speak what is real, even when others do not." He placed a small golden pin on the boy's tunic, shaped like an open eye. "This will remind you, and all who see it, that truth is never foolish, and lies are never noble." The boy's family bowed, tears of pride in their eyes. From that day on, the emperor invited the boy and his family to the palace every summer festival. The boy grew into a fine young man, honest, kind, and trusted by all. Under the emperor's new rule, the kingdom flourished. Markets grew busier, schools opened in every town, and artists filled the streets with color and music. No one feared to speak their mind, and even the poorest felt that their voice mattered. In time, the emperor grew old. His hair turned silver, his hands trembled slightly, but his eyes, calm, wise, and clear, still shone with warmth. One morning, as the sun rose over the palace towers, he stood before the same mirror where he had once admired his invisible robes. This time, he smiled at the wrinkled face looking back. "I was once blind," he whispered to his reflection, "but I learned to see." He turned away from the mirror and stepped out onto the balcony where his people waited to greet him. The crowd cheered, not for his riches or appearance, but for the man he had become. The emperor raised his hand, and the cheers softened. "My dear people," he said, his voice steady though faint with age, "years ago, I stood before you with nothing on but pride. Today, I stand before you clothed in the truth you gave me. Never be afraid to speak it, no matter who stands before you. Truth," he paused, smiling gently, "is the finest robe any person can wear." And so the people cheered again, not for a ruler dressed in splendor, but for one who had finally understood what makes a kingdom strong: honesty, humility, and heart. And though time would pass and new rulers would rise, the tale of the emperor's new clothes was told again and again, not as a story of shame, but as one of wisdom, of a proud man who lost his vanity but found his truth. And in every retelling, when children laughed at the thought of an emperor walking in invisible clothes, their parents would smile and say, "Yes, but remember, he learned." And that's what matters most.